For a sailor in the age of sail, a truly formidable enemy wasn't a pirate ship on the horizon or a monstrous storm. It was their own water barrel. Imagine being surrounded by an endless ocean, yet facing the threat of thirst because your drinking supply is failing. After a few weeks at sea, fresh water stored in wooden casks would often become stale and unpleasant, filled with slime and algae. While not always deadly, this sick water was a constant threat to the health and morale of a crew. So, with no access to modern filters or chemicals, how did sailors keep themselves alive for months, or even years, at sea? The story of fresh water on the high seas is one of desperation, ingenuity, and a surprising amount of alcohol. To understand the solutions, we have to appreciate the scale of the problem. For much of maritime history, the standard container for water was the wooden cask, but these barrels were far from perfect. The wood itself was porous, and even with sealant, they could become breeding grounds for algae and bacteria. Within weeks, the water would stagnate, developing a foul odor and taste. This contamination was more than just unpleasant. It was a drain on the crew's well-being and could contribute to the spread of sickness. The challenge was immense. A large naval vessel might carry hundreds of men, each needing a steady supply of water. But the longer the voyage, the worse the water became. Sailors would describe their drinking water as ropy, or so thick with slime they had to strain it through their teeth. It was a crisis that demanded a solution, and mariners developed a multi-layered defense against it. Their strategies can be broken down into 4 main categories: better storage, purification, distillation, and a very creative use of other beverages. The first line of defense was improving the containers themselves. While the wooden cask had its flaws, sailors learned that its preparation mattered. For instance, the practice of charring the inside of barrels, well known in the production of wine and spirits, was also found to help preserve water. The charring process creates a layer of carbon that acts as a natural filter, absorbing impurities and slowing the growth of microorganisms. It was an early and surprisingly effective form of activated carbon filtration. Before this, we can see how other materials might have offered a better, if more fragile, solution. Greek and Roman merchant ships, for example, carried much of their cargo, like wine and olive oil, in large ceramic jars known as amphorae. Unlike porous wood, the vitrified, glass-like surface of these clay containers was far less prone to contamination. While we don't have clear evidence that amphorae were the primary vessel for drinking water at sea, their superiority to wood suggests they were a potential option. There's also a fascinating bit of material science that may have played a role, even if sailors didn't understand the chemistry. It's a phenomenon we now call the oligodynamic effect, where small amounts of certain metals can kill microbes. Some ancient cultures on land used copper and silver vessels to keep water pure, and modern science has confirmed that copper is incredibly effective at killing bacteria. It's speculative whether this knowledge was systematically applied to water storage on ships, but it represents another tool that potentially existed in the ancient world's fight for fresh water. When better storage wasn't enough, the next step was to clean the foul water before drinking it. The most basic method, practiced for centuries, was filtration. Ancient civilizations knew that passing water through materials like sand or charcoal could improve its clarity and taste. A sailor could have built a makeshift filter by filling a cask or box with layers of sand and charcoal, and then pouring the slimy barrel water through it. This wouldn't create sterile water, but it would trap sediment and absorb some of the foul taste, making it much more palatable. Boiling was another ancient and effective technique. Bringing water to a boil for just a few minutes is enough to kill most dangerous bacteria and parasites. On a ship with a galley fire, this was a feasible option for small quantities of water, perhaps for the captain's table or the sick bay. Boiling enough water for an entire crew every day, however, would have been impractical, due to the immense amount of fuel required. But what if you ran out of fresh water entirely? The principle of desalination, removing salt from seawater, is surprisingly ancient. The Greek philosopher Aristotle, writing around 350 BC, correctly observed that when salt water evaporates, the vapor is fresh, and when that vapor condenses, it doesn't turn back into salt water. This basic understanding led to small-scale, desperate attempts at distillation. The philosopher Alexander of Aphrodisias, writing around 200 AD, gave an account of sailors boiling seawater and using sponges to absorb the steam. Once saturated, the sponges could be squeezed out to yield a small amount of drinkable fresh water. These methods were incredibly inefficient and could never produce enough water to sustain a full crew. Yet, for a handful of sailors shipwrecked or adrift, this simple grasp of distillation could mean the difference between life and death. It was a last resort survival technique, grounded in a principle that wouldn't be harnessed on an industrial scale for many centuries. Perhaps the most widespread and enduring solution to the water problem was to drink something else. Ancient seafaring cultures in the Mediterranean, like the Greeks and Romans, commonly stocked their ships with wine. Later, in Northern Europe, beer and ale became the standard issue. These beverages were hydrating, and their alcohol content helped inhibit the growth of the bacteria that plagued water casks. For a time, the British Royal Navy's regulations authorized a daily ration of about a gallon of beer per sailor. It was considered safer and more reliable than the water stored on board. As voyages grew longer and crossed into warmer climates, however, beer often spoiled. This led navies to adopt more stable spirits. After England's capture of Jamaica in 1655, rum gradually became the drink of choice for the British Royal Navy. It stored far better than beer and was much more potent. Of course, giving sailors a half pint of high-proof rum every day created serious discipline problems. This prompted a famous innovation in 1740 by Vice Admiral Edward Vernon. Known as Old Grog for the waterproof grogram cloak he wore, Vernon ordered that the daily rum ration be diluted with 4 parts water. The crew quickly nicknamed the mixture grog. This new drink reduced drunkenness and stretched the rum supply. But it also had an unintended benefit. Mixing the potent rum with foul cask water masked the slimy taste and swampy odor, making it much easier for sailors to stay hydrated. Later, as the Royal Navy grappled with the deadly disease scurvy, citrus juice, a source of vitamin C, was added to the daily rations. This juice was often mixed directly into the grog, creating a single drink that helped solve 2 of the greatest health crises at sea: unsafe drinking water and scurvy. From charring barrels to distilling seawater with sponges and mixing rum with water, sailors developed a remarkable array of strategies to survive. They were resourceful problem solvers, using the materials at hand to tackle life-threatening challenges. The principles they used, filtration, distillation, and preservation, are still fundamental to water purification today. The makeshift steam collector used by a desperate sailor is the distant ancestor of the massive desalination plants that now provide water to entire cities. And the simple act of mixing a spirit with water to make it drinkable is a tradition that lives on, a quiet echo of a time when a sip of grog was a matter of survival on the high seas.